We're going to be looking at Daniel, the 11th chapter from 36 through 45, and it's the final version. Let me make out a little note here. And I need to send a little note, and then we'll be ready to go. We're going to start out with a blessing. In Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Okay, tonight, like I said, we will be studying the end of the 11th chapter of Daniel, and we will. I wanted to kind of give a little bit of an overview, going back a little bit before we started, what I've got here is just a review of Daniel 11, and whereas the most of the early part of the chapter was historical in nature. The second verse, of course, it talked about the Medo-Persian kings, and then the third verse it was referring to Alexander the Great. And then the 4 through the 20th verses, that pretty much talked about the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic dynasties, and all of their wars going back and forth between the various guys, Seleucus this and that, and AntiChrist 1, 2, and 3, and all the Ptolemies up to I think up to 5, and just they were in constant warfare for 100 years there. And then in chapter 11 verses 21 to 35. Now you remember last week I talked about this being Antiochus Epiphanes and the AntiChrist, and so most of the commentators and most of the people that write about this, these Bible scholars, they just talk about this 21 through 35 as being describing primarily Antiochus Epiphanes, and there are some of those kinds of it does describe him in some way as kind of a future in the future. So tonight we're going to be talking about that part, and as well as going on with verses 36 through 45 as being strictly the Antichrist. Now, there is a alternative or a corollary view about these verses that it was held by, there were, I don't know, I counted up about 4 or 5, maybe 6 guys back in the 1800s that wrote about this. And then most recently is Joel Richardson. He writes about how that the verses 21 through 45, starting with 21 and 45 through 45, is really a picture of the Antichrist, and that certainly, even though Antiochus Epiphanes or Antiochus IV was could be looked at, and some of the things that are written in there certainly do parallel his reign and his kingdom and some of his exploits, that we could actually go back, and there's language in Daniel that would make this whole thing from 21 through 45 as about the Antichrist. And either way, it really, tonight I'm not sure that I'll be able to get into it. definitively that that's what that is. But let's go ahead and look at these verses here, starting at 36 actually. Then the king will do as he pleases, exalting and magnifying himself above every god. He will even speak outrageous things against the God of gods. He will prosper until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been decided will be done. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers or the one desired by women, nor will he show regard for any god, but will exalt himself above all. Now, this, when it starts out, and some of the translations start out this way, the others just say, so the king will do as he please, and then some of them say, then the king will do as he please. This then word there, it signals a leap in time. I think it goes from where Daniel is talking about the near future for him, which is actually history for us, but the near future for him, which would be happening within the next 100 years or so, to the time of the Antichrist. Because you remember back earlier in Daniel in chapter 10 there, where the angel told him, this is, we're going to tell you about the end times of what will happen to your people. And so we got to keep that in mind, keep the context that when all this writing that are in the visions and everything that we're giving to Daniel, it's for the Jewish people primarily. He's signaling what will happen to the Jewish people. Now, in this verse here, 36 to 37, that it says this predicted king will have power to do as he pleases. And apparently he will not be subject to a higher human authority. Now that you can look at, let's look at some things here. I don't think that this king that they're talking about in 36 and 37 could be Antiochus, because if you look back, Antiochus could not do as he pleased. You remember that there was a time where he came up against the Romans, and this Roman senator drew a line or drew a circle around Antiochus and told him, if you don't do what we tell you and you step out of that circle before you agree to our terms, then we will consider this to be a state of war between us, and we will bring all of our forces against you. And so Antiochus knew his strengths, and it's like the old Clint Eastwood movie, a man's got to know his limitations. Well, Antiochus understood that he could not defeat the Romans flat out, and so here he was. He actually didn't do as he pleased. So these verses really could not have been referring to Antiochus. The Romans certainly hindered his conquest, and he didn't exalt himself above all gods. You remember that when he erected a statue in the temple, it was not a statue of himself. It was a statue of Zeus. He still he still honored and worshipped the full pantheon of Grecian deities. They had a whole bunches of them, and so he was good with all of them. He didn't try to put himself above those gods at all. He just maybe he dissed some of the other gods that were around, but not the Greek ones. He did stay up with them. So again, this does not, these verses don't really describe what we would say of Antiochus. Now, this king that we're talking about here in 36 and 37 will be different, just like the beast in Daniel 7:23 was different. You remember that in that passage that Daniel said that this one beast, the others could be described as some sort of an animal. The the leopard, the bear, the eagles, and all of that, lion, and so forth. That they had attributes of certain fierce animals. However, the fourth beast that he talked about in his vision did not. It just defied description, actually, because he really couldn't. He couldn't pin something on it that says, okay, this looks like a lion, or this looks like a leopard, or a panther, or a bear, or whatever. It was a terrible beast, a monster, as it were, and it's worse than any Frankenstein monster that Hollywood could dream up. So it says this fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on earth that will be different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth and trample it and crush it. Now, all the other beasts that we had talked about, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Grecian Empire, all of those were geocentric kingdoms. Now, what do I mean by that? Those were kingdoms that were centered around having a capital in a certain part of the world, and the power was the power of the government was administered from that throne or seat of government. You had Babylonian Empire, of course, it came from Babylon. Then the Medo-Persian, well, then the Persian Empire, they had their seat of power in Susa or Shushan. Then the various of Greece, they had their power back in Macedonia. So these were they had a central government. This other one, I believe, is not going to be the same way or the same fashion. And we've talked about how that I believe that this fourth kingdom is not Rome, but they've made a big leap. And I think probably next week I'm going to go into and do a review of why I think this was not Rome, and we will try to nail that down as we go into that last few verses in Daniel 12. And so this particular beast, or this king, if you look ahead in Revelation 13 and 1 through 10, I'm just going to kind of read through that quickly. Then I saw a beast rising out of the sea that had 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 royal crowns, and upon his heads were slanderous names. Now the beast that I saw was like a leopard, his feet like a lion's, and mouth like a bear. And the dragon gave him power and his throne and great authority. One of his heads seemed to be slain, but the fatal wound was healed. The whole earth was amazed and followed the beast. And they worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. They also worshiped the beast, chanting, "Who is like the beast, and who can make war against him?" The beast was given a mouth uttering great boasts and blasphemies. It was given the authority to act for 42 months, 3.5 years. Then he opened his mouth with blasphemies against God to slander his name and his tabernacle, that is, those dwelling in heaven. And he was also permitted to make war against the Kedoshim, the saints, and overcome them. And he was given authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. All who dwell on the earth shall worship him, everyone whose name has not been written in the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is meant for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be killed by the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and faith of the Kedoshim. That's some very obscure writing in Revelation that John came up with. It it's descriptive of the Antichrist. And we're going to get, once we get into Revelation, we'll explain some of this stuff, or come up with some theories anyway, because I'm not sure that I know I'm not comfortable with with going into Revelation and saying it's A, B, C, D, E. This is the way it is, and because I've seen way too many people do that, and then only to find out as history goes on, time goes on, that they were terribly wrong. So anyway, this let's go ahead and look at some of these. I wanted to just mention some of the common interpretations of who this king would be, and of course the vast majority of the people. I read Adam Clark and John Calvin and John Gill, some of these other guys that were, hundreds of years ago, and they looked at, some of them thought that it could be Antiochus IV, and then a great many of them looked at it and said, well, this is Rome, because this, in fact, the Rome is the preterist view, meaning that they feel like that all of the prophecies and so forth of Daniel have already taken place and were fulfilled in the destruction of Rome, of Jerusalem, and destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. Now, then there are a bunch of the commentators that talk about this Antichrist being the Catholic Church. They agree that it's not Antiochus, it's going to be something in the future. And of course, then the most popular, especially among many of the reformists, Protestant reformists, was that it was the Catholic Church led by the Pope. And in fact, in some of my early training years and years ago, when people would talk about Revelation, they always talked about it being that the Antichrist and the things that are going to come against Israel is always the great European Union, and it's going to be led by the Pope, and he's going to be the Antichrist. And again, of course, that's from a Protestant point of view. You don't hear the Catholics saying that. Then I saw another one here just recently that talked about some kind of a revived Napoleonic empire. Never did see the sense in that one, but that one, when I was reading that one, it was in French, so maybe somebody decided, if some Frenchman decided that that's what the Antichrist was going to be. And so then, of course, you hear about the European Union as being the Antichrist, because they talk about the 10-nation confederation and so forth, and that made sense to people as long as there were only 10 nations in the European Union, and then it kept expanding and expanding up to what I think 23 or 27 was the final figure, and still people started bailing out like Great Britain is going to be bailing out. So these are some of the common interpretations of who this king starting in verse 36 would be. Now let's go ahead. In 38 and 39 said, instead of these, he will honor a God of fortresses, a God his fathers did not acknowledge. He will honor with gold, silver, precious stones, and costly things. He will attack strong fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will give them authority over many, and will parcel out land for a price. Now, this God of fortresses, it's interesting that this king, it says, will be a worshiper of war and of military might. So he's going to be putting his thrust and his trust and everything more in just overwhelming power and war rather than diplomacy. If you remember, some of the descriptions of Antiochus Epiphanes was that he did things by flattery and stealth. In other words, he was in some ways he was a diplomat. He would talk his way into situations, and he's quite a smooth operator. Even though he did do a lot of military things, he was also a diplomat. Now, this guy here that we're talking about, it says that he will be a worshiper, or he likes war and military might. That's what he relies on. And his religious views, it talks about that that they will be different than his ancestors, because it says that he would not, that he didn't believe like his forefathers did. And his government will be corrupt in that what it says that that he'll parcel out land for a price, and parcel out positions and authority and power by for a price. This Alan says sounds a bit like the Stalin-Hitler pact of World War II. In many ways, it did. Both of those guys believed in just strict, overwhelming power. The blitzkrieg, the Panzer blitzkriegs across Eastern Europe were just a classic example of this kind of power, where they just went through with overwhelming force of the German armored divisions that were supported then by the Luftwaffe and the Eastern Europeans. Those armies were still running around on horseback, for goodness sake. So they were just totally overwhelmed, and I think this Antichrist will be in pretty much the same kind of a situation here. Now, it is kind of interesting that this God of fortresses that we look at here, we go back up here, he will honor a God of fortresses, and he'll attack strong fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and so I found that this God of fortresses is there's a name for it in Middle Eastern language. It's called Allah al-Muiz. Well, guess what? That's one of the 110 or 100, something like, there's about 100 authorized names for Allah in the Islamic religion. This is one of them, the God of fortresses, the God of war, so it's kind of interesting that the language in Daniel would actually say that he will honor a God of fortresses, and then one of the names of Allah in the Islamic religion is a God of fortresses. So and it talks about how that he had a different religion than his ancestors. He didn't follow the gods of his fathers. I ran across a writing by a guy named Nathaniel West, and he wrote this in 1898. He talked about, it's his book called Daniel's Great Prophecy. Now remember, this was written in 1898. This is Allah Ma'azim, the God of fortresses or strongholds, placing here his confidence whether in the strongholds of the Orontes, Nile, Euphrates, Tigris, Bosphorus, in Syria, Egypt, Macedonia, or Asia Minor, the broken up empire of Alexander. Honoring Allah, he said, with gold, silver, precious stones, and costly things, a God unknown to his ancestors, and whose religion he would propagate by the sword, procuring for his strongholds garrisons of people who acknowledged his strange God, increasing them with glory while putting to the sword others, causing them to rule over the many, and because needing money for war, dividing the land he conquers for the sake of gain. The meaning of this difficult verse. Such the three great characters of the king. The first was not seen in Antiochus to the extent here predicted. The second was seen in his butchery of infants in Jerusalem, his treatment of the Maccabean mother and her sons, and his inhumane conduct everywhere. That, Antiochus did that. That's for sure. The third was seen in the confidence he placed in fortresses and in the propagation of his religion by the sword. But yet the full reality of all awaits the future and the final Antichrist. So this guy here, Nathaniel West, that he wrote back in 1898, he's describing the conquest of Islam and how they conquered the areas of the Middle East. I mean, when this started out, Daniel said that they would not honor the gods of his fathers. Remember, now Daniel wrote this in what, 500 or so BCE, and that Islam came about 600 at 622 CE, so 1,000 years later after Daniel's prophecy. So obviously, then these guys were honoring some god that was totally unknown to Daniel or anyone around him. He was obviously not following the gods of his fathers, whoever they may have been. Now, some of the commentators, in fact, most of the commentators that I looked at and looked up this word, the ma'ozim, which is the Hebrew, they called this the Catholic Church because of their worshiping of saints and that this worshiping of the saints was the unknown religion, or it was something that was unknown to their forefathers, because the idea of worshiping saints was new to all of the major religions at that time. So again, this is coming from guys like John Gill, Adam Clark, John Calvin, and so many of the other ones that are out there that came out of the Protestant and the Reformation, and of course then they had an axe to grind with the Catholic Church. So their interpretations were biased. Now, said this king will reward his followers with land. This is not an uncommon thing. In fact, that has been the norm throughout human history, that if you do something for the king, then okay, he'll give you some land. That was something that silver and gold is one thing, but if you give somebody land, then that's something that they can defend. That's something that they can develop. It's much more of a tangible thing than just silver gold. Much harder for someone then to come and take it away from them than would be silver and gold. If we go ahead in Daniel 40 and 41. Now, at the end of the time, the king of the south will attack him, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He will invade lands and pass through them like an overflowing river. He will also invade the beautiful land. Many will be overthrown, but these will escape from his hand. Edom, Moab, and the chief of the sons of Ammon. Now, this end of time, if we look up here in that first line, the end of time, or the time of the end, has been described as the end of the reign of Antiochus, but history just doesn't bear that out. As the events described in Daniel just did not occur for Antiochus like this. The time of the end must therefore, in my opinion, refer to future events. Of course, remembering everything was future to Daniel, but I'm talking about future events for us. And I believe that this is what we will call the Great Tribulation. And we know that it will be a time of great upheaval, war, famine, and bloodshed. The identity of the king of the south and the king of the north is actually, I mean, that's a subject of a lot of debate. Now, who is this? Who's the king of the north? Who will it be? I mean, I've read, it's all over the map. It's literally all over the map as to who this could be. Because I hear some people that say, well, if this is going to be Turkey and a revived caliphate of Islam, the Ottoman Empire. You know, you remember that the Ottoman Empire was it held sway from my goodness, 700 A.D. to all the way up to 1914, 1918. World War I ended the Ottoman Empire in Turkey. And then others will say, well, it's Russia, because they're talking about the king of the north, and then Russia's way up there. And a lot of the things that were written about Russia being the king of the north and invading and so on and so forth, that was actually, a lot of those theories came out of the 50s and the 60s here, where that Russia was the enemy of all freedom-loving people everywhere, and so they were a very convenient villain. And others earlier would have said that it would be Syria, again, because Syria was a very convenient villain. Now, and I've added down there something that, this is kind of open to interpretation, and I'm just kind of throwing it out there because I don't know. But could it be Shia Muslims? Now, and I'll show you a reason for that maybe later on in a slide after this. King of the South. Now that's, is it Egypt, or, could it be like Saudi Arabia, something like that? Or could it be the Sunni Muslims? Now, here's a map of Muslim distribution, it's called, and you'll see that the light green is all Sunni. Those are all Sunni Muslims, and you may recall, maybe you know, that Islam is divided primarily into two major divisions, one being Sunni and one being Shia, and it all goes back to when Muhammad died. Then how are they going to split up their the kingdom there? And so it ended up that one side was more close relatives, and then other people in the mix. They were more of the his followers, but they weren't relatives. And so these guys have been fighting each other now for hundreds and hundreds of years. And in fact, in today's world, if you were to count up, okay, who kills more Muslims than anybody else? Well, it's other Muslims, because it's the Shia against the Sunni. And we saw that a lot in Iraq when we were trying to subdue Saddam Hussein and his band of pirates over there. That many of the people that much of the carnage that was caused over there was basically Sunni against the Shias. The people, Iran is primarily Shia Muslim, and then they've got their puppet in Lebanon. Lebanon is Shia, and then parts of Afghanistan, and then down in Yemen. But most everything else is Sunni. Now, what I was looking at here is the possibility that when we're talking about the king of the north, well, who knows? I mean, it's going to be a little bit tougher to say that it would be Russia because and it could very well be, but what I'm looking at here is the possibility that if we're looking at it as being Russia, as being a king of the north, or something up here, of course it would be from I don't believe it's going to be anything in Europe, because I mean Europe nowadays has degenerated into toothless wonders. I mean, this is where the United Nations stuff comes from, and we know what fierce fighters the United Nations troops are. I mean, they can't even these countries in Europe anymore can't even defend themselves against these immigrants that are coming up there and devastating their countries, and they just roll over and play dead. So I don't believe anything that something's going to come out of Europe, and it could very well be Russia, but I think it would be more in conjunction or with an alliance or a puppet state of for instance, like Russia is closely aligned with Iran right now, and where our alliances with the United States, and we're not even going to talk about the United States as in terms of end time prophecy, because I don't believe we figure in very strongly. But you have these client states, as it were, where I believe that Saudi Arabia is actually they have some alliances with some of these other countries to in some way keep the power of Iran in check. In fact, in the last year or so, the defense minister from Saudi Arabia has been having several meetings with the defense minister of Israel in order to work out a mutual defense kind of a deal, to where if Israel wanted to go and put an end to Iran's foolishness, that they could come through, fly across Saudi Arabian airspace, land in Saudi Arabian air bases, refuel, and continue their military strikes into Iran. Why? Because Iran is Shia. Saudi Arabia is Sunni for the most part. And of course, they've got some of the wild and crazy Wahhabis and so forth like that. But still, Saudi Arabia views Iran as a threat to their security. So who would these, the king of the south would be? I think we still have yet to see the military alliances that may start forming here. We know that President Sisi of Egypt is consolidating his grip down there in Egypt, and so far he has shown himself to be friendly to the United States and respectful of Israel. So so you do have the possibility that these countries down here, the southern parts here, Egypt and maybe Saudi Arabia, and these areas here could be somewhat friendly or tolerant of Israel, where we know then that these guys here, Iran and say Syria and some in Turkey and so forth, some of these others, even though they may be Shia or Sunni, they're dedicated to the destruction of Israel. So who are these kings? I don't know who they are yet. I think history will start bearing them out. To me, it makes more sense that the revived Ottoman Empire with Turkey, possibly with a Russian ally, could be the king of the north, and then the south would again be somewhere down here with Egypt and this part. But the Bible does say that this Antichrist will come along and he will defeat the king of the south. Let's go ahead and look at that last the last verses there, and then we'll conclude it here. He will extend his hand against the countries. The land of Egypt will not escape. He will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, as well as all the riches of Egypt. The Libyans and the Cushites will also be under his feet. That's northern Africa, and then on down southern south of Egypt and eastern Africa. That's Ethiopia and Sudan, that area down there. But reports from the east and north will alarm him, and he will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his tents, his royal tents, between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will meet his doom and no one to help him. So what this tells us is that it appears that the forces of the Antichrist will be able to defeat whoever it is, the king of the south that's coming against him. And what can we say? We don't know exactly who the king of the north is, who the king of the south is, but we do know that the Antichrist is neither one of them, because it says the king of the north will attack him and the king of the south will attack him, and he'll defeat the one in the south, and then it says the north and the east will disturb him. He'll head back up there to take care of that, and eventually it does give us a little bit of hope, because it says that he will meet his end, his doom, and no one is there to help him. But in the meantime, in God's plan, this Antichrist will be headquartered in Jerusalem. We know that for sure. He'll make a peace treaty with the Jews, and after 3.5 years of this peace treaty, he will break the treaty. And then we'll have what we call the true abomination of desolation that Yeshua, Jesus, talked about in Matthew 24. If we and in future classes, we're going to be looking a little bit more at those prophecies and trying to put some of this stuff together in Daniel. So this kind of finishes out chapter 11 in a way. Next week, we're going to look at chapter 12 and then bounce back into chapter 11 from 12, and to show some things that will kind of show where the verses in chapter 11, 21 through 45 were actually directed, all of them directed at the Antichrist, and not so much Antiochus. And then we'll